Well, this session is all about. I've titled it Story Time, but essentially it's about an opportunity for all of you to just open up and and the way that we're sitting at the moment probably doesn't convey that, because those in the back row are looking at the back of people's heads. So ideally it would have been in a circle, but we might change that around, and we will probably do that throughout this day. But I wanted to start off with God's big story. It actually, the funny thing is actually, Tamwin actually put me onto this, because last year at Kingsford Church, Tamwin took us on a series of God's big story. I don't know, you haven't done that at Hurstville yet, have you?
In 3 weeks.
In 3 weeks?
Yes.
Oh, there you go.
Oh, that was planned.
It's for someone who's read the Bible for many years, it was quite eye-opening to see the connectedness. And if you look online, I don't have it on this slide, but there's actually, someone has actually done the big data to work out all the cross-references from the entire length of the Bible, and it comes out to this wonderful pattern. We'll go into, later on today, we'll go into our community story, or a story of Hurstville Church, and we'll unpack that as well. And the last bit is my story, is your story. And these 3 questions I actually use for those who are being baptised, to put it together in like a 3-minute package as a testimony that we've shared with the church. And we did a baptism last month, and just the way that he's, without even knowing what he said, when he got to the point of what is my life like after receiving Jesus, his face just lit up, and it was just amazing. So it's one of those things where if we look at it and if we understand it from God's big story, it helps us to tell our own story. So Greg Goldsworthy in his book Gospel and Kingdom, he says that God's big story is the kingdom of God. It's God's people in God's place under God's rule and blessing. And if you were to ask, and if you were to think about what's the Bible all about, it's about God's plan of salvation, His promise to restore His kingdom, and then the fulfillment of that promise through His Son, Jesus. That's what it is. That's not my words. That comes out of the book written by Vaughan Roberts, which Tamwin will actually walk you through that. And it's such a big thing, but if we believe that we are part of God's kingdom, that we are God's people, that in fact we're all blessed in a way that we're not trying to strive for blessing, we're not trying to strive for anything. Actually, because we're already in God's presence, that we're already blessed. So let me just share just a few pictures of me, my story. This is my wife Dee, and they're just the sort of pictures. Generally, it's either around food or trouble. They're probably the two things that we love doing the most: food and travel. And she's lovely. And unfortunately, she's not here, but that's okay. She's given the blessing to me, for me to be here. Now, some of you know me, and some of you don't. And I'll spend the next couple of minutes trying to tell my story. And then we'll have opportunities for all of you to tell your story in smaller groups. Because I believe that once you know my story, we'll have this connection and this understanding of one another that we may not have had before. So prior to today, or even prior to last week when you saw me on video, most of you would have said, well, who's Victor? Like, what makes him, you know, why would the leadership invite Victor here? I don't know him. But I'm hoping that by the end of this weekend, you go, actually, I do know a lot more about him. So I was born in Indonesia. I came here when I was 2. I didn't come here by myself. You know, my parents took me, brought me along, which was lovely of them. So I came to Australia. I've been a Sydney boy ever since. And my family were Christians from way back, from my grandparents, my parents onwards. And it's quite interesting because for me anyway, as I look at my family history, I go, wow, my grandmother loved to pray. She loved to pray. And faithfully prayed over many years. And the fruit of that was that all of her son-in-laws, so my grandmother from my mother's side were all girls. So all the son-in-laws became either elders, most of them became elders, or actually, sorry, all of them became elders, a couple of them became pastors as well. You look at the next generation down, my generation, and 3 of us are now in ministry. So it's interesting to see the prayer life that has come through that. I wasn't always like this. I wasn't always such a fun-loving, quiet, reserved kind of guy. But you know, when I was 12, I gave my life to Christ. I'd been part of the church for a number of all my life really, and it was nothing spectacular. I remember growing up as a teenager going, or even in my 20s, going, man, I wish I had one of those really exciting spiritual moments where it'd be a great testimony of how my life changed from, I was the bad boy, Christ came and now my life is, it's been turned around, all that kind of stuff. And yet, now that I'm into my 40s, I go, actually God's done such a wonderful thing to raise me up in that family. As a teenager, grew up, loved serving in church, and all I wanted to do was either play music and just serve. That was my heart. And I never planned, never thought I'd be a pastor. But here I am, and God's been doing some amazing things. And so as I look back, I see that God has seems to be every 8 to 10 years something, a major life change or something happens in those times. It wasn't always easy, life, part of me wanted to work and part of me wanted to continue to serve, and it was hard. And yet, found love. Partly engineered. We were both in the music team together, and I was also doing the rostering. So just slightly engineered it a bit, but we were great mates beforehand, and we continue to be. So I love that. About 10 years ago, about 10 years ago, this is. We found out that we were not able to have children of our own biological children, which is very difficult to take in, and yet at the same time, I just sensed that okay, God must have something amazing in store for us. Don't know what that is, and yet, as I look back, I think I see glimpses of what that might be. So part of it is to go, okay, okay, God, how do we become the best uncle and auntie that we can be to the kids around us, to our own family, to our own families, and to the wider church family. And coming from an Indonesian background, it's very difficult to have not to have kids, because every second question that comes to us as we meet the uncles and aunties in our Indonesian church context is, oh, so how many kids do you have? Or when are you going to have kids? And even now, like, I'm in my 40s, and biologically it's probably difficult for women to have kids in their 40s. We still get the questions of, oh, so when are you going to have kids? And we say, and we don't say much, and then they go, oh, don't worry, God will bless you. Okay. But how does that shape my faith? How does it shape my trust in God? And part of it is a story of God using me in different ways. Like, I never thought I'd be a church pastor. I never thought I'd be conference president of Churches of Christ, and yet here I am. I never thought I'd be speaking in front of people, and this is what I'm doing right now. So if we go back and we go, well, what was my life before Jesus? Well, it was, and we'll spend probably the next 15 minutes or so for all of you to go in small groups and ask this question. But if you can answer these three things in 2 minutes, you're well on your way to be able to tell, to share the good news of Jesus Christ in your life. What was my life before Jesus? Well, I didn't really know because I was 12 years old. However, having said that, through my teens and through my 20s, even though my faith probably didn't wax and wane or anything like that, there was still trust in God. And if we were talking to non-Christians or other people, there was still trust in a higher power. I've heard said many times. But my life was one where there were ups and downs, where there was things that were in my own personal life that I probably haven't shared with many people, of the struggles that I had. When I was 25, I was trying to do too much, and God I came into a point of burnout, and it was like, okay, there was some there was a long period of restoration through that. So I don't really know what my life was before Jesus, except to say that through my life with Jesus, there's been some good times, there's been some difficult times, but through it all, there's been trust in God. How did I come to believe in Jesus? Well, when I was 12, I was already part of a faith community, and it was the people around me who had trust in God, who had this joy, who had this enthusiasm for life. Okay, that's something I want. That's something I want for my life. And that's where I go. Okay, Jesus. If you really say in John 10:10, like, the thief has come to kill, steal, and destroy, but I've come to give you life and to give it life to the full, which happens to be the saying here at the Tops, then I want to live a life to the full. And so that started my journey. What was my life after receiving Jesus? Well, it wasn't all the just roses and everything's like fantastic. I've noticed that, especially in the last 10 years, it's been times of struggle, but also in those times that my faith has deepened, that the roots in my own trust and faith in God has gone deeper and deeper. I liken it to a palm tree. That if you've ever seen a palm tree, the roots go down extra deep, and yet its one purpose is to grow straight up. And even if there were winds and storms and hurricanes and the like, it might be blown over a little bit, and yet its trajectory is still upwards. So that's my life after receiving Jesus. Let's take the next 15 minutes or so and in groups of two or three or four, or I'm not sure how you need to do the groups, Tanner, just to share your own story, because you may not have heard each other's salvation story. You may not even be there at the moment. Some of you may not be up to this point yet. What is my life after receiving Jesus? But that's okay. You're exploring. But I would guess that most of you probably don't know each other's story that well. So let's take this opportunity to hear from each other in your smaller groups.